I never thought I'd be the kind of father whose own son would leave him stranded at an airport with nothing but the clothes on his back. But there I was, 65 years old, standing in the departures area of Toronto Pearson International, watching my son Marcus drive away with my wallet, my phone, and apparently whatever shred of decency I thought I'd raised him with. It had started that morning with what I thought was a generous offer. Marcus called me at my small apartment in Etobicoke, his voice bright with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years. "Dad, I want to make up for missing your birthday last month. I've booked us a weekend trip to Vancouver, just you and me, like old times. I'll pick you up in an hour." I should have known better. Marcus and I hadn't taken a trip together since he was 12, before his mother passed, before he went to university and became embarrassed that his father spent 30 years laying bricks instead of sitting in boardrooms. But I wanted to believe my son still cared, that maybe turning 42 had made him reflect on what really mattered. The drive to the airport should have been my first warning. Marcus barely spoke, his jaw tight, checking his phone at every red light. When I asked about his wife Vanessa and my grandson, he gave clipped, one-word answers. I chalked it up to work stress. Marcus ran some tech consulting firm downtown, the kind of business I never fully understood but pretended to whenever he bothered explaining it. We pulled up to Terminal 1, and Marcus popped the trunk. "Just grab your bag, Dad. I need to park, and I'll meet you inside at the check-in counter. Air Canada, flight to Vancouver, leaves at 2. I hauled out my old duffel bag, the same one I'd used for 30 years of construction site work, now repurposed for this unexpected trip. Marcus was already pulling away before I even reached the curb. I figured he was rushing to find parking in the chaos of airport drop-offs. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. I stood at the Air Canada counter like a fool, watching other families check in, elderly couples holding hands, fathers helping their adult children with luggage. The irony wasn't lost on me. When the agent finally asked if I needed help, I explained I was waiting for my son. She smiled politely and moved on to the next customer. It was only when I reached for my phone to call Marcus that the reality hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. My jacket pocket was empty. My phone wasn't there. I checked my other pockets, increasingly frantic. My wallet was gone too. The small backpack I always kept my essentials in, also missing. Then I remembered. Marcus had asked me to put my bag and backpack in his car trunk, so we wouldn't have to carry everything. I'd handed him my backpack without thinking. Everything was in there. My wallet with my credit cards, my driver's license, my health card, my phone, the $200 cash I kept for emergencies, even my house keys. I felt my chest tighten, that old sensation from my days doing heavy lifting in the summer heat. But this wasn't physical exhaustion. This was the slow, crushing realization that my son had deliberately taken everything and left me here. I stood there for another hour, hoping it was some misunderstanding, some terrible mistake. Maybe he got into an accident, maybe his phone died, but deep down I knew Marcus had been planning this. The sudden invitation, the insistence I leave my stuff in his car, the quick getaway. This wasn't an accident. An airport security officer eventually approached me, concerned about the old man standing alone, looking lost. I tried to explain, but how do you tell a stranger that your own flesh and blood abandoned you? The officer was kind, but firm. If I didn't have a boarding pass or proper ID, I couldn't stay in the terminal. I'd have to leave. "I don't have money for a cab," I admitted, the shame burning in my throat. "My son took my wallet." The officer's expression shifted from concern to pity, which somehow felt worse. He suggested I contact someone, call a friend or family member. But my phone was gone, and most of my old work buddies had moved away or passed on. My brother lived in Halifax. I'd never been good at making friends outside of work, and after I retired 2 years ago, my world had shrunk to my small apartment and the occasional visit from Marcus, visits that had become increasingly rare. The officer helped me to the passenger pickup area outside the terminal. At least out here, I could sit on a bench and figure out what to do. It was late September, one of those beautiful fall days in Toronto when the air is crisp but the sun still has warmth. Small comfort when you're stranded and humiliated. I sat on that bench, watching families reunite, lovers embrace, business travelers rush to their cars. For the first time in my life, I felt truly old. Not just physically old. I'd been waking up with aching joints for years, but old in the way that makes you invisible, irrelevant, easy to discard. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 30 minutes, lost in a fog of anger and disbelief. I kept replaying every interaction with Marcus over the past year, looking for signs I'd missed. The way he'd bristled when I showed up to his office once, wearing my work boots and plaid shirt. The time he introduced me to his business partners, as David instead of my father. The increasing gaps between phone calls. I should have seen this coming. But you don't want to believe your own child is ashamed of you. Excuse me, sir. The voice was gravelly, worn smooth by decades. I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for quite some time. Are you all right? I looked up to see an elderly man, probably in his 80s, standing before me. He was impeccably dressed in what even I could recognize as an expensive suit, despite his slightly stooped posture. He had a walking cane with an ornate silver handle, and his white hair was neatly combed back. His eyes, though clouded with age, were sharp and assessing. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. Then, because I was tired of pretending, I added, "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." The old man gestured to the space beside me. "May I?" I nodded, and he lowered himself carefully onto the bench, his cane between his knees. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a young family load suitcases into their SUV. "Waiting for someone?" he asked. I said. "My son? But he's not coming back." The old man nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. "I see. And you have no way to get home? No phone, no wallet, no keys. He took everything." The words came out bitter. I must sound pathetic, complaining to a stranger. "Not pathetic," the old man said quietly. "Just honest. That's rarer than you'd think." He paused, then asked, "How far do you live from here?" "Etobicoke. Maybe 25 kilometers. I could walk it in a few hours if I had to, but—" I gestured at my aging body, the one that had served me well for 6 decades but was now creaking like an old building. The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm going to make you an unusual proposition. You can refuse, and I'll understand completely. But I think we might be able to help each other." I looked at him skeptically. "I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's business. A transaction, if you will." He shifted his weight, his knuckles white, on the cane handle. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm waiting for my driver to pick me up. I've been visiting an old colleague here at the airport hotel, and my car should arrive in about 5 minutes. "Good for you," I said, not bothering to hide my bitterness. Here I was, stranded, and this rich old man was rubbing it in. But Robert Chen wasn't finished. "Here's my proposition. I need someone to accompany me to my home in Rosedale. Someone to pretend to be my son who's returned after many years away. Just for today, just to get through one dinner with my household staff and lawyer. In exchange, I'll give you a ride home, replace your phone, and provide you with $5,000 cash." I stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not." His expression was deadly serious. "I'm an old man with limited time and a complicated situation. My real son passed away 15 years ago. Since then, various relatives and supposed long-lost children have crawled out of the woodwork, all hoping for a piece of my estate. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of people seeing me as nothing but a bank account." "So you want me to pretend to be your dead son?" I struggled for words. "That's insane. Why would you do that?" "Because I want to see how people react when they think I've reconciled with my son. I want to see their true colors before I finalize my will." Robert Chen looked at me directly. "You have an honest face. The face of someone who's worked hard his whole life. And right now, you need help. And I need someone who has nothing to gain from manipulating me." A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, and a professional-looking driver stepped out. "Mr. Chen, sir. Ready to go?" Robert Chen stood slowly. "This is your choice, mister." "Campbell. David Campbell. Mr. Campbell, you can walk away right now, and I'll wish you well. Or you can get in this car, spend a few hours helping an old man conduct a social experiment, and leave significantly better off than you are now. What do you say?" I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was bizarre, potentially dangerous, definitely strange. But I looked at that Mercedes, then back at the long walk ahead of me, and I thought about my son abandoning me like garbage. What exactly would I have to do? I asked. Just be yourself. Call me Dad a few times. Act like a son who's been away but has returned. My housekeeper and my lawyer are expecting me home for dinner. Let them see you, let them wonder. That's all. Robert Chen extended his hand. Do we have a deal? I looked at that extended hand, weathered with age spots but still strong. Then I thought about Marcus's face when he dropped me off, how he couldn't even look me in the eye. I shook Robert Chen's hand. Deal. The drive to Rosedale was like entering a different world. I'd worked construction in Toronto for 30 years, but I'd only ever seen neighborhoods like this from the outside, usually covered in scaffolding, while crews like mine renovated homes worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. The houses were massive, old money estates with manicured lawns and iron gates. Robert Chen's home was on a tree-lined street where the leaves were just beginning to turn gold and red. The Mercedes pulled into a circular driveway in front of a 3-story brick mansion that looked like it belonged in an English countryside, not downtown Toronto. Welcome home, son, Robert said, and there was something in his eyes. A test, maybe, or a challenge. The driver opened my door, and I stepped out onto pristine stone pavers. A woman in her 50s appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from professional greeting to absolute shock. Mr. Chen, you didn't tell me you were bringing. Is this? She looked between us, confused. Margaret, I'd like you to meet David, Robert said calmly. My son, he's come home. Margaret's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Disbelief, confusion, and something that looked almost like disappointment. Your son, she repeated. But I thought. I know what you thought. Robert's voice was gentle, but firm. Life has a way of surprising us. David will be staying for dinner. Please prepare the dining room. Margaret nodded stiffly and disappeared inside. I felt like I'd stumbled onto a stage in the middle of a play I hadn't rehearsed for. Why did she look disappointed? I whispered as we entered the foyer. Robert's smile was thin. Because Margaret's nephew has been very attentive lately, convinced he'll inherit this house. Come, let me show you around. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from old money. Hardwood floors that gleamed, original artwork on the walls, furniture that was probably worth more than most people's cars. But what struck me wasn't the wealth, it was how empty it all felt. This massive house, and only one old man and his housekeeper. Robert showed me to a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden. The truth is, David, I wasn't entirely honest with you at the airport. My guard went up. What do you mean? This isn't just about watching people's reactions. It's about... He paused, looking out at his garden. I've spent the last 15 years alone in this house, ever since my wife passed a year after my son. Every day, people come by, distant relatives I haven't seen in decades, business associates, my lawyer pressuring me to finalize my estate. Everyone wants something. And you're tired of it? I said. I'm dying, David. He said it matter-of-factly. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. I have maybe 6 months, possibly less. And in these last months I've realized something. I never properly mourned my son. I never let myself imagine what it would have been like if he'd lived, if we'd reconciled after our falling out. You had a falling out? Robert nodded. James wanted to pursue art. I wanted him to take over my mining business. We said terrible things to each other. He moved to Vancouver, and 3 years later, he died in a car accident. We never reconciled. I never told him I was proud of him, that I was wrong. The weight of his words settled between us. This wasn't just a social experiment or a test of people's greed. This was an old man trying to heal a wound that had festered for 15 years. So you want me to pretend to be him? I asked quietly. No. I want you to be the son who came back, not James. I'm not that delusional. But the son I wish I'd had a second chance with. The son who came home before it was too late. Robert looked at me directly. And in exchange, I'll give you something too. A chance to see that not all fathers and sons are like you and Marcus. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden. "One dinner?" I confirmed. "One dinner. Then you're free to go, with my gratitude and the money I promised." Robert extended his hand again. "But I have a feeling you might want to stay longer." I shook his hand, still uncertain what I'd agreed to, but something in Robert Chen's eyes reminded me of my own father, a man who'd worked himself to death in a factory, who'd never had the luxury of reconciliation or second chances. Margaret called us to dinner at 6. The dining room table could have seated 20, but it was set for 4. Robert sat at the head, me to his right. 2 other places were set across from us. "Who else is coming?" I asked. "My lawyer, Gerald Morton. He's been persistently interested in my will lately. And Margaret's nephew, Thomas. He's been visiting frequently, offering to help with my affairs." Robert's tone was dry. "They should both be very interested to meet you." The doorbell rang, and moments later, a thin man in an expensive suit entered, followed by a younger man in his 30s, who looked like he spent more time in the gym than at work. Both froze when they saw me. "Gerald Thomas, I'd like you to meet David Campbell," Robert said smoothly. "My son." The lawyer recovered first. "Robert, I think there's been some confusion. Your son James passed away in 2010. David isn't James. David is." Robert paused, and I held my breath, wondering what elaborate lie he'd concocted. "David is my son from a relationship before I met my wife. I've recently reconnected with him." The room went silent. I could practically hear the wheels turning in both men's heads, recalculating inheritance splits, reassessing their strategies. Thomas recovered next, pasting on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Uncle Robert, this is quite a surprise. You never mentioned another son." "There are many things I haven't mentioned, Thomas." Robert's voice was cool. "David, please sit, let's eat." The dinner was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life, and I'd once spent 6 hours trapped in a broken elevator with a man who wouldn't stop talking about his divorce. Gerald, the lawyer, kept asking pointed questions about my mother, my childhood, dates, and places I had no answers for. Robert deflected each one smoothly, mentioning discretion, privacy, old wounds. Thomas, meanwhile, watched me like I was a snake that had slithered into his garden. "So, David, what do you do for a living?" "I'm retired now. Used to work construction." I saw no point in lying about that. "Construction?" Thomas's smile was condescending. "How? Industrious. And you're only reconnecting with your father now? After all these years?" "Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what matters," I said, thinking of Marcus, of this morning at the airport. The words came out more honestly than I'd intended. Robert reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Well said, son. Well said." I saw Gerald and Thomas exchange a glance. Whatever they'd hoped for from this dinner, my presence was clearly not it. After dinner, Gerald pulled Robert aside for a private conversation. I could hear raised voices from the sitting room. Gerald's incredulous tone, Robert's calm responses. Thomas cornered me in the hallway. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing," he hissed, "but my family has been taking care of Uncle Robert for years. Years. You don't just show up out of nowhere and expect—" "Expect what?" I cut him off. "I'm not expecting anything. Robert invited me to dinner. That's all." "Right. A long-lost son appears just months before a wealthy old man dies. What a coincidence." Thomas's face was flushed with anger. "My lawyer will be very interested in this sudden development." He stormed off, and I stood alone in that grand hallway, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. This was supposed to be a simple transaction, a few hours of my time for a ride home and some cash. But it was turning into something far more complicated. Robert found me standing there. I apologized for their behavior. "But now you see what I deal with daily. Everyone measuring my worth by my bank account." "I should go," I said. "I've done what you asked. This is getting too messy." "Stay the night," Robert said. "It's late, and I suspect you're not eager to return to an apartment you can't enter without keys. Tomorrow, I'll have a locksmith help you, replace your phone, and give you what I promised. Please, David. One night, these old walls get lonely." Something in his voice got to me. Maybe it was the loneliness I recognized, the same loneliness that had been creeping into my own life since retirement. Or maybe it was simpler, I had nowhere else to go. One night, I agreed. Robert showed me to a guest room that was bigger than my entire apartment. A four-poster bed, an ensuite bathroom with heated floors, and a window overlooking the garden. He'd laid out fresh clothes in my size. Had he planned this? And told me to make myself comfortable. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Not just for the room or the clothes, but for reminding me that maybe not all people were like Marcus, that maybe kindness still existed in unexpected places. "No, David, thank you." Robert stood in the doorway, looking suddenly frail and exhausted. "You've given an old man a gift today, a chance to imagine what might have been. That's worth more than you know." That night, I lay in a bed that cost more than my truck, in a house that represented everything I'd never had, and thought about the strange turns life could take. 24 hours ago, I was preparing for a trip with my son, still foolish enough to believe in reconciliation. Now I was pretending to be a stranger's son, caught up in a web of greed and inheritance disputes. But here's what struck me. Robert Chen, for all his wealth, was just a lonely old man trying to make peace with his regrets. In that way, he wasn't so different from me. We were both fathers who'd lost our sons, his to death, mine to shame and greed. I finally fell asleep around midnight, and I dreamed of Marcus as a child, before everything got complicated. When he used to sit on my shoulders at construction sites, wearing my hard hat, asking a million questions about how buildings stood up. When he was proud to tell people his dad built things that would last forever. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of fresh coffee. For a disoriented moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came back. The airport, Robert Chen, the bizarre dinner. I half expected to wake up and find it had all been some kind of fever dream. But the expensive sheets were real, the heated bathroom floor was real, and when I went downstairs, Robert was real too, sitting at the breakfast table reading the Globe and Mail. "Good morning, son," he said, and there was something different in his voice. "Lighter, maybe? Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," I admitted. "Look, Robert, about yesterday. Before you say anything, I have a proposal. A real one this time, no pretending required." He set down his newspaper. "Stay here for a week. Just a week. Help me with some projects around the house. Keep me company. Let me get my affairs in order. At the end of the week, I'll pay you $20,000, plus everything I promised yesterday." I sat down heavily. "Why?" "Because in the last 15 years, you're the first person who's shown up in my life who doesn't want something from me. You didn't even want to be here. That's refreshingly honest." Robert poured me a coffee. "And because I'm selfish enough to want to experience what it's like to have a son around again, even if it's borrowed time. What about Gerald and Thomas? They'll fight this. Let them." Robert's smile was sharp. "My money, my house, my choice. And legally, I'm well within my rights to have guests. Gerald can bluster all he wants." I should have said no. This was getting too deep, too complicated. But I thought about my empty apartment, about Marcus's betrayal, about the fact that I had nothing to rush back to. And I thought about Robert dying alone in this massive house, surrounded by people who saw him as a payday instead of a person. "1 week," I said, "but I'm not pretending to be your son anymore. I'll help you out, keep you company, but no more lies about who I am." "Deal." Robert extended his hand for the third time, and this time when I shook it, it felt less like a business transaction and more like the beginning of something neither of us had expected. That week turned into the strangest, most unexpected time of my life. Robert kept me busy with projects, organizing his extensive library, helping catalog his art collection, even just sitting with him in the garden while he told stories about his life. He'd built his fortune in mining, started with nothing and worked his way up, not unlike my own path in construction. We had more in common than you'd think, despite the vast difference in our bank accounts. Margaret warmed up to me after the first few days, once she realized I wasn't trying to con her employer. "He's been different since you arrived," she confided one afternoon while bringing us tea in the garden. "More alive, more like his old self." Thomas, on the other hand, became increasingly hostile. He showed up unannounced multiple times, always with new accusations or demands. During one particularly ugly confrontation, he accused me of elder abuse and threatened to call the police. Robert shut him down cold. Thomas, I am of sound mind and body. Well, as sound as a dying man can be. David is my guest. If you cannot be civil, you will not be welcome in this house. Thomas left, but not before shooting me a look that promised this wasn't over. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. I was in Robert's study, helping him go through old photo albums, when he showed me a picture of James. The resemblance wasn't physical. James had been shorter, darker-haired, looked nothing like me, but something in his eyes, a certain stubbornness, reminded me of Marcus at that age. What did you fight about? I asked. You and James. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Control. I wanted him to live the life I'd planned for him. Business school, taking over the company, all of it. He wanted to paint, to create art, to live authentically. I told him he was throwing his life away. Robert's voice cracked. The last thing I said to him was that if he walked out my door, he was no longer my son. And he left. He left. 3 years later, his roommate called to tell me about the accident. James had been driving home from an art show where his work had been featured. He'd finally found success doing what he loved, and I'd missed all of it because I was too stubborn to admit I was wrong. I looked at that photograph, at the young man frozen in time, and thought about Marcus, how I'd pushed him to follow in my footsteps, work with his hands, learn a trade, how I'd been disappointed when he'd chosen university, business, a world I didn't understand, how that disappointment had driven a wedge between us that grew wider each year. You think Marcus will ever forgive me? I asked quietly. For what? Robert looked surprised. For working hard to provide for him? For being a father? For not being the kind of father he wanted? For embarrassing him? For being too working class, too rough around the edges for his business world? The words came out bitter. He's ashamed of me, Robert. That's why he left me at that airport. He wanted me gone. Robert set down the photo album. Then Marcus is a fool, but fools can sometimes learn. The question is, do you want him to have that chance? I didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted to never see Marcus again, to write him off the way he'd written me off. But another part, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike, reading him bedtime stories, holding him when his mother died, that part still hurt too much to let go completely. I don't know, I admitted. Neither did I, Robert said. And then it was too late. Don't make my mistake, David. On the 5th day, Gerald the lawyer showed up with papers. He'd done some digging and discovered that I wasn't Robert's son from a previous relationship. He seemed disappointed that this revelation wasn't more dramatic. We know who you really are, Mr. Campbell, Gerald announced triumphantly. You're nobody. Just some construction worker Robert picked up off the street. I never claimed otherwise, I said calmly. Robert knows exactly who I am. Gerald turned to Robert, exasperated. Robert, this is madness. You're letting a stranger into your home, your private affairs. I have serious concerns about your judgment. Your concerns are noted and dismissed, Robert replied. David is my friend. That's all you need to know. Now, unless you have actual legal business to discuss, I suggest you leave. Gerald left, but not before warning Robert that he was making a terrible mistake, that he'd regret this, that people would question his mental competence if this continued. After he'd gone, Robert looked tired. I'm sorry you had to endure that. I'm more concerned about you, I said. Are you sure this is worth it? All this drama? David, I've spent 15 years trying to buy my way out of loneliness. 15 years surrounded by people who wanted my money but not me. This week, having you here, having real conversations with someone who expects nothing from me, it's been the most peaceful time I've had since Eleanor died. Robert looked at me seriously. That's worth any amount of drama. That night, over dinner, Robert asked me about my life. Really asked, not the polite surface questions, but the deep ones. What had made me happy? What were my regrets? If I could do it all again, what would I change? I found myself talking about my late wife, Sarah, how we'd met at a diner where she was waitressing to pay for nursing school, how she'd seen something in the rough 19-year-old construction worker that I couldn't see in myself, how she'd believed in me, supported me, loved me despite my rough edges. She sounds wonderful, Robert said. She was. She died 12 years ago. Cancer. I hadn't talked about Sarah in years, not really. Marcus never wanted to discuss her. It hurt too much. But with Robert, it felt natural. She made me want to be better than I was. After she died, I think I stopped trying. Is that when things changed with Marcus? Maybe. He was always ambitious, always wanted more than the life we had. Sarah balanced that, kept him grounded. After she was gone, I shrugged. I lost them both, in different ways. Robert reached across the table and gripped my hand. I'm sorry, David, for all of it. We sat there, two old men who'd loved and lost, who'd made mistakes and lived with regrets, and something passed between us that I can only describe as understanding. In that moment, Robert wasn't a billionaire, and I wasn't a retired construction worker. We were just two fathers trying to make sense of the complicated relationships we had with our sons. On the 6th day, my temporary phone rang. I'd been using a prepaid phone Robert had bought me until I could sort out getting my accounts back. The number was unknown, but I answered anyway. Dad? Marcus's voice was uncertain, almost scared. Dad, is that you? My chest tightened. It's me. I've been trying to reach you for days. Your phone's been going straight to voicemail, and when I went to your apartment, you weren't there. I was starting to think. He paused. Where are you? Somewhere safe. No thanks to you. The anger I'd been suppressing for 6 days came flooding back. You left me at the airport, Marcus. You took my wallet, my phone, my keys, and you drove away. There was a long silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was thick. I know what I did, and Dad, I'm so sorry. I panicked. I saw your bag in my trunk, and instead of turning around, I just kept driving. I told myself you'd figure it out, that you'd be fine. But you weren't answering your phone, and I realized. God, Dad, I'm so sorry. Why? The question came out hoarse. Why did you do it? Another long pause. Because I was ashamed. Vanessa's parents were supposed to come on that trip with us, and I couldn't face them seeing you, Dad. The way you dress, the way you talk, all those construction stories, they're so refined, and I knew they'd judge me for having a father who's so different from their world. Each word was a knife, but at least it was honest. So you abandoned me instead. I'm a coward, Dad. I've been a coward for years, and I'm sorry. Please, tell me where you are. Let me come get you. Let me try to make this right. I looked around Robert's study, at the man who'd become more of a father to me in 6 days than my own son had been in years. I'm staying with a friend, and I'm not ready to see you yet, Marcus. What you did, I need time to process it. But Dad, I'll call you when I'm ready. Don't call this number again. And Marcus, take a long, hard look at the man you've become, because your mother would be ashamed, and right now I am too. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. Robert had been sitting quietly in the corner pretending to read, but I knew he'd heard everything. Was I too harsh? I asked. No, you were honest. That's what he needed to hear. Robert closed his book. The question is, what do you need? What did I need? I'd spent 6 days in this house, living a life that wasn't mine, but feeling more at home than I had in my own apartment. I'd connected with a dying stranger, in a way I'd never connected with my own son. But this couldn't last. Robert's time was limited, and my real life was waiting. I need to figure out how to forgive him, I said finally. But I don't know how. Start with forgiving yourself, Robert said. For whatever role you played in pushing him away, it's never just one person's fault when a relationship breaks. That night was my last night in Robert's house, according to our agreement. He insisted on a celebratory dinner, just the two of us. Margaret prepared an elaborate meal, and Robert opened a bottle of wine that was probably worth more than my monthly pension. To unlikely friendships, Robert toasted. To second chances, I added, and we clinked glasses. Over dessert, Robert grew serious. I want to tell you something, David. This week has meant more to me than you can possibly understand. You've given me something I thought I'd never have again, the chance to be a father, even if just temporarily. Robert, he held up a hand. Let me finish. Tomorrow, Gerald is coming to finalize my will. I've made some changes based on these past 6 days, and I wanted you to hear them from me first. My stomach dropped. Robert, if you're putting me in your will, I can't accept. That's not why I stayed. I know. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Robert smiled. Don't worry. I'm not leaving you my entire estate. Most of it is going to establish a foundation for young artists. In James's memory, they'll get the support he never got from me in life. That's beautiful, I said, genuinely moved. But I am leaving you this house. I nearly choked on my wine. What? No, absolutely not. Robert, I can't. You can, and you will. Here's my reasoning. Thomas will contest the will no matter what I do, so I'm leaving him a generous cash settlement, enough that fighting will cost him more than he'd gain. Gerald gets his fees and a bonus for all his trouble. Margaret gets her pension and a significant retirement fund. But this house... Robert looked around at the walls that had sheltered him for decades. This house needs someone who'll appreciate it not for its value, but for what it represents. A home. You understand that, David, in a way no one else in my life does. But there are conditions. You can't sell it for 5 years. You must live in it for at least 6 months of each year. And, Robert paused, his eyes twinkling, and you must use it to help at least one person each year the way I helped you. Someone who needs a second chance, a place to figure things out. Keep the guest room ready, David. You never know who might need it. I sat there, speechless, as Robert continued. Tomorrow, when Gerald arrives, he'll read the will. Thomas will probably explode. It will be very dramatic and very uncomfortable. But I need you there, David. I need someone in that room who's there for the right reasons. And what are the right reasons? I asked. Friendship. Plain and simple friendship. Robert raised his glass again. Can you do that for me? I thought about everything I'd learned that week. About forgiveness, second chances, and the families we choose versus the families we're born into. About 2 lonely old men who'd found unexpected companionship in the chaos of an airport abandonment. Yes, I said. I can do that. The next morning, I woke early and found Robert already dressed in his best suit, looking every inch the formidable businessman he must have been in his prime. Margaret had tears in her eyes when she saw us both at breakfast. You're both too stubborn for your own good, she said, but she was smiling. Gerald arrived at 10, looking grim. Thomas came with him, and so did a woman I didn't recognize, Thomas's lawyer, apparently. They all gathered in Robert's study, the tension thick enough to cut. Gerald cleared his throat. Robert, before we begin, I need to ask one final time. Are you certain about these changes? You understand that they will likely be contested? I understand perfectly. Read the will, Gerald. What followed was exactly as dramatic as Robert had predicted. The foundation announcement was met with tight-lipped approval. Margaret's pension brought genuine tears to her eyes. Thomas's settlement, a cool $2 million, should have been generous, but his face darkened when he realized what it meant. And the house? Thomas demanded. The Rosedale property? Gerald looked uncomfortable. The house, all furnishings, and the property are bequeathed to David Campbell, with the conditions stated herein. Thomas exploded. This is insane. He's known this man for a week. 1 week. And you're giving him a property worth $15 million? Yes, Robert said calmly. That's exactly what I'm doing. We'll fight this, Thomas's lawyer interjected. There are clear grounds for contesting based on undue influence, questions of competency. Try it, Robert interrupted. I've had 3 independent psychiatrists evaluate me in the past month specifically to prevent such claims. I am of sound mind, clear judgment, and this is my free and conscious choice. David Campbell is receiving this house not because he asked for it, but because he's the only person who came into my life in the last 15 years who wanted nothing from me. The room erupted in arguments, accusations, threats of legal action. Gerald tried to maintain order, while Thomas shouted about family loyalty and Robert's clearly diminished capacity. Through it all, I sat quietly, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Finally, Robert stood, his voice cutting through the chaos with surprising strength. Enough. This is my house until I die, and I will not have it filled with this kind of ugliness. Thomas, you have your inheritance. It's more than generous. If you choose to waste it on lawyers trying to get more, that's your decision. But know this, The only reason you're getting anything at all is because your Aunt Eleanor loved you. If it were up to me alone, after the way you've treated me these past months, you'd get nothing." Thomas's face went white, then red. "You ungrateful. Get out." Robert's voice was ice. "All of you. Except David and Margaret. Get out of my house." Gerald gathered his papers, his face professionally neutral. Thomas's lawyer looked like she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. Thomas himself stood there, shaking with rage, before finally storming out with a final, "This isn't over!" When they were gone, Robert collapsed into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 80-some years. Margaret rushed to his side. "Should I call Dr. Harrison?" she asked worriedly. No, I'm fine. Just tired." Robert looked up at me. That went about as well as expected. "Robert, I can't accept this," I said. "Not if it's going to cause this much trouble." "The trouble isn't your fault. The trouble is that I spent too many years letting people like Thomas think they were entitled to my money simply because we shared DNA." Robert reached for my hand. "David, I want you to have this house. Not because you need it, though God knows a retired construction worker could use the security, but because I know you'll turn it into a home, not just a real estate asset. Promise me you'll keep the guest room ready. Promise me you'll help someone the way I helped you." I looked around at the study, imagining it filled with laughter instead of legal arguments, with people instead of loneliness. "I promise." Margaret squeezed both our hands. "Robert, you stubborn old fool. You've done a good thing. I've done the only thing that felt right." Robert smiled weakly. "David, I think I need to rest now. But tomorrow, I want to show you how everything works. The house systems, the finances for maintenance, all the practical matters. Can you stay a bit longer?" "As long as you need me," I said, and I meant it. That evening, my temporary phone rang again. "Marcus." I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Dad, please don't hang up," he said quickly. "I found out where you've been staying. The lawyer Vanessa uses mentioned something about Robert Chen's will, and Dad, is it true? Did he leave you his house?" Word traveled fast in legal circles, apparently. "How did you—" "Vanessa's parents know Gerald Morton. They're furious because apparently Thomas's family, and—" Marcus paused. "Dad, they think you conned an old man." "Of course they do," I said bitterly, "because someone like me couldn't possibly have earned anything legitimately." "That's not what I think." Marcus's voice was urgent. "Dad, I've spent the last week thinking about what I did, about who I've become. You were right, Mom would be ashamed. I'm ashamed. And when I heard about Mr. Chen's will, my first thought wasn't that you conned anyone. My first thought was that of course he saw in you what I've been too blind and stupid to see." I felt something crack in my chest. "What's that?" "That you're a good man. That you're honest and kind and loyal, and all the things I pretended were embarrassing were actually the best parts of you." "Dad, He voice broke. "I threw away my father because I was afraid of what other people would think. And now a stranger valued you more than I did. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." I closed my eyes, thinking about Robert and James, about the words that were never said, the chances that were never taken, about the difference between being right and being happy. "Come to dinner tomorrow night," I said. 6 o'clock. Bring Vanessa and my grandson. It's time you met Robert properly." "Really? Dad, do you mean it?" "Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Don't be late." I gave him the address. After I hung up, I found Robert in the garden, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening. He looked peaceful, staring up at the stars. "I invited Marcus to dinner tomorrow," I told him. Robert smiled without looking away from the sky. "Good. A house like this should be filled with family, even imperfect ones." "Especially imperfect ones," I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, and I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. A week ago I'd been abandoned at an airport, stripped of everything, believing my life had reached its lowest point. Now I was sitting in a $15 million garden, about to inherit a house I never could have imagined, with a chance to rebuild the relationship I'd thought was broken beyond repair. "Thank you," I said to Robert, "for everything. Thank you, David, for reminding me what it feels like to be a father again, even if just for a little while." The dinner with Marcus was awkward at first. Robert was gracious, welcoming him with none of the judgment Marcus probably expected. Vanessa was stiff but polite, clearly uncomfortable. But my grandson, 4-year-old Tyler, broke the ice by immediately asking Robert if he was a wizard because his house looked like a castle. Robert laughed, a real genuine laugh that I hadn't heard before. Not a wizard, young man, just an old magician who's learning new tricks. Over dinner, Marcus apologized. Not the defensive, excuse-filled apology I might have expected, but a real one. He admitted his mistakes, his misplaced priorities, the way he'd let other people's opinions matter more than his own father. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Marcus said, "but I want to try to be the son you deserve, Dad, if you'll let me." I looked at Robert, who nodded slightly, encouragingly. "We'll figure it out," I said, "one day at a time." It wasn't a magical reconciliation. We had years of distance to overcome, hurt feelings to heal, new understanding to build. But it was a start, and watching Tyler play in Robert's garden, hearing Robert tell him stories about his own son, James, I thought maybe we could find our way back to each other after all. Robert died 6 weeks later, peacefully, in his sleep. In those final weeks, I was there every day. Marcus came often too, bringing Tyler, and I think Robert died knowing he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do, create a family, even if it was an unconventional one. Thomas contested the will, as promised. It took 18 months and cost him more than he inherited, but eventually the courts upheld Robert's wishes. The house became mine, legally and completely. I kept my promises. I live here now, in this house that still feels too big for one person. But I've kept the guest room ready, and in the 3 years since Robert's death, 7 people have stayed there. People going through divorces, job losses, family estrangement. People who needed a safe place to figure out their next move. Marcus and I aren't perfect, but we're better. He brings Tyler every Sunday for dinner, and we're teaching him to build things in the workshop I set up in Robert's old garage. Tyler doesn't care that his grandfather used to lay bricks, or that some people think we come from different worlds. He just knows his grandpa tells good stories and makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches. Last week, I was at the airport, Pearson International, same place where this all started. I was picking up one of Robert's Foundation scholarship recipients, a young artist from Vancouver. As I stood in the arrivals area, I thought about that day 4 years ago when Marcus abandoned me here, when I thought my life had hit rock bottom. And I realized that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are just the universe's way of pushing us toward where we're supposed to be. Robert saved me that day, but the truth is, I think I saved him too. 2 lonely old men who found family in the most unlikely place. I still miss Robert. I keep his photo in the study, next to one of James. Sometimes I talk to them both, tell them about Tyler's latest adventure or Marcus's new business success. I like to think they can hear me wherever they are. The house in Rosedale isn't just a building anymore. It's a home, filled with second chances and new beginnings. It's proof that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most, who sees value in you when everyone else sees nothing worth keeping. And every day I keep that guest room ready, waiting for the next person who needs what Robert gave me. A chance, a home, and someone who believes they're worth saving. Because that's what fathers do. The real ones, anyway. They see potential where others see problems. They offer hope when all seems lost. They remind you that it's never too late to rebuild, to start over, to become the person you were always meant to be. That's Robert's legacy. Not the money or the house or the foundation, but the ripple effect of one act of kindness at an airport on a September day. One old man who decided that maybe, just maybe, the stranger on the bench was worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, we saved each other.